Hello, my name is Regina Trailweaver. I'm a clinical social worker and a yoga teacher and a yogin. And I want to talk about social justice and yoga. There are basically two paths for yogins who are interested in social justice, and not all are, but that is a different subject for another talk. Some yogins don't think we should have anything to do with political circumstances or situations or change. I am not one of those. I believe that we need to pay attention to what is happening out in the world. But I do think there are two different ways in which to cope with the turbulence of these troubled times. And let's also remember that this seems to be a cycle throughout human history, that there's turbulence and troubled times. Apparently, there have been ages in which there was great peace and equity, and all people were experiencing abundance, and that must have been like paradise. And there is definitely the potential for paradise right here on this planet. We know it's beautiful. We know that so many people are good people who have good hearts, who are compassionate. There is so much wisdom and knowledge. And yet, here we are with a lot of challenges facing us once again. So the two paths are basically one of retreat and one of engagement. And just intuitively, I lifted my left hand for retreat, a little bit more of a feminine, lunar strategy, and my right hand for engagement, a little bit more of a masculine, solar strategy. And remember, masculine does not mean male, and feminine does not mean female. So there are yogins who retreat. They develop a sanctuary, a monastic place that is still and quiet, a place where knowledge is protected, retained, maintained, remembered, and passed on. While out in the world, there may be a lot of darkness and very little light, and people have forgotten. People have forgotten the knowledge, the truth, the wisdom of the sages. And then there are those who engage. They are out there in the world, engaging, fighting for justice. I like the term social justice. I feel that includes economic and racial justice as well. Fair distribution of resources would bring about really a revolution. We wouldn't be destroying the planet and dealing with climate change if resources had been equitably distributed in the last many thousands of years. So the sages of yore could see what was going to happen, that there would be these cycles of evolution, but also devolution, of figuring things out, of remembering the ancient truths, but then also not figuring things out and forgetting, just forgetting common sense to some extent, certainly forgetting the ethics. And these two paths need each other. They work in tandem together because when you are out there in the world and you are engaging with the problems that people are having or that groups of people are facing, you get tired and you need a place to retreat to. And that is another role that these retreat centers, if you will, can play. They provide a place of nourishment, of replenishment, of filling up the well, so that you can go back out there again, having connected back in to a place that supports you and that remembers that what you are doing is important work. So, this is where, at least in some way, the idea of Dharma comes in. So, for some people, their Dharma is this place of retreat, of passing on the knowledge, of remembering the practices, but also being there as a place of warmth and compassion and replenishment for people who are tired and exhausted and drained and depleted. And whichever way you choose, it's not completely this way or that way, right? We always need a little bit of both. So you're out there, you're working hard, you're fighting for justice. Sometimes you need to retreat. You're here retreating, really protecting, remembering, carrying on the light. But sometimes those people need to go out into the world and share, and they do. So these two paths really work together. And whatever your dharma is, to retreat or to engage, you need to have these yoga practices either way. If you're retreating, you have a lot more time, maybe, to meditate, practice pranayama, etc. But if you're out there in the world engaging with the fight for what is right, then you also need to be practicing at least a little bit every day. So the practices of yoga, meditation, pratyahara, the involution of the senses, pranayama, energy regulation, asana to balance the energy in the body, and the ethics, non-harming, non-lying, non-stealing, non-excess, non-greed. You need these ethics if you're out there in the world. And you also need contentment, discipline, purity, and surrender of the individual self to the higher self or to the cosmic consciousness, however you want to think of it, and self study, self inquiry, such an important practice, ethical practice, whether you're in retreat or in engagement. And I think sometimes maybe more when you're in engagement because there's so much going on all the time. It's easily to become very externally focused. Whereas when you're in retreat, it's easy to go inward. But we need to have that ethic of self study, self inquiry. And then I also wanted to speak to how this is played out in recent history. So we can think of Gandhi, for example, and he definitely understood the value of having a place that you could retreat to, but clearly his dharma was to engage. And Martin Luther King Jr. and all of the many leaders of the civil rights movement, they studied Gandhi, who had studied the ethics. They were drawn to the literature that Gandhi had studied. So they studied the yogic literature. They studied the Bhagavad Gita, which is a wonderful story about whether to engage or retreat. The other more ancient history that I think a lot of people don't know about is that there was a social justice movement in India in the 1400s, and it was the Bhakti, or what became known as Bhakti Yoga. And it involved a lot of singing and dancing. And that was one of my most favorite aspects of the civil rights movement. And what drew me to it as a young child was the music, the folk music. Thought it was just amazing because artistically it was good music, but the lyrics were also just so captivating and capturing what was happening for people and the struggle that they were having at the time. So the Bhakti yoga movement was working to bring up the injustices of the caste system. I think sometimes we take it for granted that that's part of the Hindu culture, but the yoga culture is not exactly the same as the Hindu culture. They are very intricately entwined, for sure, but the gurus and the yogins, the sages, tended to operate outside of the political and traditional structures of the Hindu religion. They used the same literature, they have many of the same traditions, but they really had a different aim and purpose. Because, as always, when institutions hang on to their power and develop hierarchies, they tend to become corrupt and they tend to become more interested in their own power than in the well being of the people. And a true guru is interested in the well being of the people, of all the people, regardless of their circumstances, whether they are rich or poor, whatever their race is, whatever their ethnicity is, whatever their gender is. Although certainly there is a history of patriarchy in the yoga tradition. But again, the Bhakti yoga tradition was much more inclusive in terms of women and brought back the ancient practice of worshiping the goddesses, which had never been completely rejected or forgotten, but had become more secondary. So that's what I have to say about the two ways in which a yogin can cope with these challenges, these tumultuous and troubled times. Stay optimistic, stay resilient by practicing, by taking care of yourself, and figuring out what is really your dharma. Are you more of a retreat, sanctuary, monastic yogin? Or are you more of a go out into the world and fight for social justice yogin? And remember, whichever one you are, keep your balance. The one who is engaging will need to retreat, and the one who is retreating will sometimes need to engage. May you be safe, healthy, happy, free from suffering, and live with ease. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Namaste.